begin with a joke. How is Kurt Vonnegut like Stephen Sondheim? They're both dead. No one gets me. Musical theater is, in a way, a form of the short story. Just like a short story, it's limited in the time it has to explore the plot, to reveal its characters, and to make an impact on the audience. Yes, I know, plenty of full-length books have been adapted to the stage, but in their adaptation, the very nature of their approach has to be changed. Look at Les Miserables. Many characters and storylines are completely cut in favor of highlighting the story of Cosette and those whose lives she has touched. Look at Wicked. There's several books in that series that go all over the place, but the musical condenses it down to its barest nature, highlighting the relationship between Elphaba and Galinda over the political intrigue. And look at Phantom of the Opera. The Daroga is gone, for one, with many other elements of the story sanitized to prioritize the romance. In other words, the essence of the story is still there, but the approach is dramatically altered to achieve the desired result in the audience's minds while fitting within the constraints of the theater. Therefore, it is sometimes prudent to approach the writing of musical theater in the same ways one might approach writing a short story. Hi, I'm Cash the Composer, and I'm writing a new musical about the local legend of Lavinia Fisher and documenting its creation on this channel. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay tuned for future videos as I continue talking about aspects of creating new musical theater. Right now, I'm just beginning the writing phase, so we'll be focusing a lot on the technical aspects of writing, including upcoming videos on the outline process and song spotting, my favorite way to use a reprise, and even a video where I'll be challenging AI to write better lyrics than me. We'll see if it can. So go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss any of these and other future videos. And if you're just now joining us, be sure to watch my previous videos to see the journey so far. After this one. Today, we'll be talking about one of my favorite guidelines for writing anything with a narrative, Kurt Vonnegut's rules for creative writing. He wrote such fantastic works as Slaughterhouse-Five, Mother Night, Cat's Cradle, Harrison Bergeron, I don't really know how to pronounce it, and many more, all of which are incredibly insightful and timeless, always absurd, and occasionally disturbing. But beyond his writings, Vonnegut left us some invaluable advice, 8 rules that encapsulate the essential merits of a proper short story. The guidance offered isn't just applicable to short stories, though. It's about crafting a compelling narrative, developing empathetic characters, and most importantly, trusting one's audience. Today, we're going to take these various rules and talk about their necessity and how they apply to musical theater. And as stated in my crass joke at the beginning, I'll be using examples from the works of Stephen Sondheim to hammer the points home. They were true contemporaries, and I think their works are quite complementary to one another. Both were willing to push the boundaries of their respective arts, often to less than stellar reception at the time, but have grown to great appreciation as time has passed, especially since their deaths. And both had great insights into both the issues in our modern society and into the nature of art itself. So let's begin. Rule number 1. Use the time of a total stranger in such a way that he or she will not feel the time was wasted. Essentially, every moment should be intentional, not a second of fluff. When you've only got around 2 hours, that can feel like too little time, but it can also feel like an eternity if you fail to engage your audience properly. It should never drag, and it should not feel like it jumps forward. The pacing should make some kind of sense in a way the audience can easily follow and appreciate. Company is perhaps the greatest example of this rule in motion in any of Sondheim's works. We don't get a single linear narrative, we just get these various little vignettes. Every single one of these shows the development of Bobby's character, their relationships, both platonic and romantic, and the eventual realization and reconciliation of their wants and needs. There's no need for connective tissue. Every moment is poignant in its own way and shows us exactly what we need to see. Nothing more, nothing less. And even when we repeat that birthday scene, the framework for the show, each time it is to mark a milestone in Bobby's journey. The lack of direction at the beginning, their want for somebody to be with, and finally, their want for somebody to be with. In my show, I'm planning on following a similar model, focusing on individual vignettes, scenes from the life of Lavinia Fisher, those moments where something changed. As stated in my last video on framing devices, I'll have the ghost tour guide narrating the story, and they'll cover those moments in between the bits we get to witness. Rule number 2, give the reader at least one character he or she can root for. It's easy to write a Mary Sue, a character with no flaws that no one can relate to. It's just as easy to burden your characters with flaws, creating a monster that everyone detests. You can do both of these, sure, but you need at least one character that your audience can latch onto. Otherwise, how will they find the emotional attachment needed to fully compel them? I think the best example here would be Into the Woods. Initially, there's a ton of characters to root for. Everyone seems like the good guy because their stories are familiar to us. Then we return from intermission, and everyone turns sour. It comes to a head when these characters literally end up sacrificing the narrator to save their own skins. But then we also see these other moments of, the princess and the baker's wife being unfaithful, Cinderella and the banker turning bitter, Jack risking the lives of everyone around him just for the sake of adventure and riches, Little Red relishing in violence, Rapunzel, the baker's wife, Jack's mother, and Little Red's grandmother literally just dying. Suddenly, it's hard to root for all of these characters. They bicker with one another in the song Your Fault, passing the blame around, refusing to accept responsibility, and then the witch comes along. The witch, who we saw as the villain at the start, but was actually the impetus for all the good that happened and all the bad. And she is the first to take responsibility and the only character to sacrifice herself for the others, to no reward, despite their hatred of her as well. She dies and the tone changes. The survivors are forced to accept responsibility, accept their flaws, work together, and learn, passing their lessons on. It is her death, then, that brings everything to a close. A nice little bow on the end of a rather ridiculous narrative. Despite her role as the antagonist of our story, it is she whom we root for throughout the story. After all, it was the gathering of the elements of her potion that brought about the baker's child, that symbol of a better future. Now in my show, the protagonist, Lavinia, will be a complex character. The audience will expect her to be the manifestation of pure evil, but she's just a woman who wants to be free. I want her to win them over. With both her good and her mistakes, they'll know the end of her story from the very start, but I want them to hope beyond hope that she'll somehow find a way out of it. And then I want to crush their hopes. Rule number 3, every character should want something, even if it is only a glass of water. It's an essential thing that every character needs direction. I've been reading this book on directing by Katie Mitchell, and she points out that even characters without words who are on stage, or even unseen characters that we don't even know in the confines of the script, need intention and agency. This is not just for the benefit of the actors, clarity in their direction, it is also for the sake of the audience, such that the world is fully developed and realized, and that the characters' wants, needs, wins, losses, their whole journeys are visible and traceable from the start. Here we are. Sondheim's final show is a great example of this. Almost every character has the exact same goal in the first act, to eat dinner. Similarly, in the second act, almost every character is just trying to leave the room. Every character has a secondary goal as well. Marianne, to remember what she's forgotten. Raphael, to seduce anything that moves. Fritz, to prove that she's worth something. The bishop, to find a purpose in his life, etc. And depending on how you look at it, they all both accomplish their goal and they all fail. Marianne remembers and said she did it, but what was it? Fritz finds meaning in love while bringing about the end of the world, while simultaneously ending the relationship built on a dream and realizing her folly in these anti-capitalistic plans. The bishop returns to his life as a bishop, but at the same time he finds a purpose in returning to his life as a bishop. Their primary wants are superficial, but there's a deeper meaning beneath, a deeper meaning which drives the show forward, a show which would otherwise be meaningless. Lavinia wants to be free. John wants to be with Lavinia, and the tour guide wants to tell a story. It's fairly straightforward. But then there's the question of the audience. It'll be an immersive experience, so the audience is a character and they need an intention too, right? Honestly, other than wanting to hear the story, which is kind of redundant and doesn't really give them a real reason to be there, they won't have a true intent. And I think that's okay. They play the bystanders, they're the witnesses, faceless people who could affect the narrative, but they don't. On to rule number 4. Every sentence must do one of two things: reveal character or advance the action. Here, this applies not just to sentences and dialogue and lines of lyrics, but also to actions on the stage. Don't have a random dance break for no reason. Don't repeat the same refrain 6 times without saying anything new. Don't have dialogue going back and forth to reiterate points already made. Don't have a song about nothing. Don't have a silence with no purpose. However, in the world of theater, there is a third thing each sentence must do: establish the setting. After all, theater is about the suspension of disbelief, and a part of that requires not just a great set, but the belief from the characters in that setting. Sunday in the Park with George is my favorite musical, so it's no surprise that I hold it as the gold standard for this, especially for my point regarding the establishment of setting. There are 2 settings in the first act simultaneously: the park at La Grande Jatte and the painting itself. There is the character of George, and there is the action of his life. Then there is the character of the painting as it comes to life, and there is the action of the many vignettes of which it is composed. Not a single second is wasted, though much of it seems frivolous at first glance. Everything works to either tell the fictionalized tale of George's life, or to remark upon that theme of legacy and creation. In regards to my show, I'll elaborate more on this once I actually begin writing the book and lyrics, but for right now, it's not really applicable at the outlining stage, but it's important to keep in mind nonetheless. Rule number 5, start as close to the end as possible. This rule is both economical in nature and emotionally impactful. Essentially, it encourages us to use our time and our audience's time wisely, telling as little of the story as we need to fully get the point across. The story doesn't need to begin at the beginning if it doesn't absolutely have to. We can therefore spend more time on less material, giving us breathing room to properly develop the characters. Assassins is almost laughably good at this. Pretty much every instance of introduction is as the assassination itself is already occurring. We don't get any unnecessary backstory or pretty much any backstory at all until the action is happening. There's no needless build-up to the moment of execution. We just get to see the action, or at most the moments leading up to it. With Booth, we just see the aftermath. We start at the end. This lets Sondheim really take his time in delving into the emotions of these characters, and Weidman pore over the symbolic aspects of these stories, of these various assassins and would-be killers. Trying to tell so many stories in their entirety would have led to a bloated mess. So instead, we have a compact, succinct, and easily comprehensible masterpiece. I plan to begin my show at John and Lavinia's wedding. However, I could just as easily start it at any point leading up to their incarceration. I'm putting in a lot of excess material from this perspective, but I do have a good reason. I want to include both historical fact and the fictional legend, which means that I need to have a bit of buffer time leading up to their incarceration to talk about the falsehood crimes of which they have been accused posthumously. Without starting so early, I would not have time to go into all the crazy details. And rule number 6, be a sadist. No matter how sweet and innocent your leading characters, make awful things happen to them in order that the reader may see what they are made of. If your story is all sunshine and daisies, what's the point? You're not testing your characters, so the audience isn't going to see what makes them real. And we have the enduring stereotype of the happy-go-lucky musical theater story with smiling faces, big love ballads, and unending tap dance numbers. Now, I'm not saying you should go on the other end of the spectrum and create the world's most emo, monotone, danceless show. I'm saying that there's merit in the negative. just as much as the positive, and demonstrating the range of theater and of its characters is truly important. This rule kind of goes hand in hand with the second rule. Why would your audience root for a character if they weren't standing in opposition to anything real? If after hearing the word sadist, you immediately thought I'd use Sweeney Todd as an example, well, you would be correct, because duh. We only have one character in this whole musical that you can really honestly root for, and that is Anthony. Anthony, the boy who saw a drowning man and rescued him. The boy who gave to a beggar wanting nothing in return. The boy who fell in love. The boy who risked everything to save a girl he hardly knew from an abusive situation while respecting her boundaries. The boy who couldn't pull the trigger when it came down to it. The boy who is so pure and good. Joanna is as insane as her parents, neurotic and babbling as her broken mother, and as willing to kill without a thought as her actual psychopath father, not helped by her pedophilic adoptive father, the rapist Judge Turpin, nor his enabler, the Beetle. Toby is broken by his mistreatment by Pirelli, the con artist, as well as the gaslighting by Mrs. Levitt, the cannibal by proxy. Anyhow, everyone except Anthony is at best damaged and at worst the actual worst of humanity. And thus they are enacting these horrible, horrible things upon one another. And all of them suffer for it. All of them are scarred, damaged, and all but Anthony and Joanna die. Anthony, the boy who did nothing wrong, he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Joanna, the girl who suffered more than anyone else in this hellish story, on the brunt end of it all. But we see mercy granted to these two, and no one else. From Sweeney both times, when he thinks all is lost because of Anthony's excitement, and when he does not recognize his own daughter. We see that they are the only two who, when it comes down to it, do not ever let go of hope. An ignorant boy and a traumatized girl both wanting to live. And that is what compels me in this show, that everyone else gives up and dies for their lack of belief that things can and will get better. But these two children managed to make it out, not undamaged, but alive. I mean, it goes without saying that I'm putting my characters through hell. They went through hell in real life. It's only fair to keep it honest. Slavery, separation, false incarceration, lynching, hanging. Honestly, I think that's enough. I won't go beyond that which is historically evident. Pushing it too far would be gratuitous and unnecessary and tragedy exploitation at its finest. I posted a video a few weeks ago talking about the issues on that point if you want to hear more detailed explanation on those necessary limitations. Perhaps the most hilariously phrased rule, number 7, write to please just one person. If you open a window and make love to the world, so to speak, your story will get pneumonia. Now, this can be interpreted one of two ways. You may choose to write your story with a specific kind of audience in mind, whether that's a specific type of person who may end up at the theater, or indeed a specific individual who you know will enjoy the show. Or you may choose to write the story that you yourself want to see. I choose to believe that this rule refers to the latter. When I write, I don't write to make something commercially viable, obviously. I write to make something that I myself would go to the theater to watch again and again. This lends an authenticity that is otherwise impossible to manufacture. Merrily We Roll Along is the obvious example of this. Famously a massive flop, causing a depression in Sondheim, nearly ending his career in musical theater, Merrily was looked on as a failure for the longest time, for Sondheim's entire lifetime, unfortunately. Sondheim was so excited to write this show that when it was pitched to him by Firth, he said yes on the phone immediately. So the heartbreak of unanimous pans in the press must have been devastating. However, he and his ardent fans never gave up on the show, trying again and again to get the world to understand Sondheim and Firth's vision. And just a few days ago, the 2023 Broadway revival was nominated for 7 Tony Awards and won 4 of them, including Best Revival, following months and months of sold-out performances to enthusiastic crowds. Confirmation that the show is indeed amazing. It just took time for us to see it properly, under the right direction, with the right actors, at the right time. Now, I have a dilemma here, where the proponents of the legend accuse me of being easily manipulated by the historical fact, and the followers of historical record accuse my perception of being distorted by the legend. I can't win. And then there's the people who just don't care. So literally the only person in the world who actually wants this show the way I'm doing it, apparently, showing the historical fact while at the same time seemingly celebrating the legend, is me. So unfortunately, I am observing this rule to the letter. And the last one, number 8. Give your readers as much information as possible as soon as possible. To hell with suspense. Readers should have such complete understanding of what is going on, where and why, that they could finish the story themselves should cockroaches eat the last few pages. Want to hear my most unpopular opinion? Suspense is dumb. Now, I'm a huge fan of horror movies, but there is a difference between suspense that isn't dumb and suspense that is dumb. Knowing what's around the corner, dreading it, being frozen in place in fear that it can jump out at any moment but without any idea as to when that will be, petrified by Schrodinger's ghost, that is proper terror. Knowing a monster exists, searching for it, never quite seeing it but catching glimpses out of the corner of your eye, instead being forced to witness firsthand its devastation, the blood, the gore, the screams of the damned, that is proper horror. And that is the key, knowing that there is something wrong. If you don't know what's around the corner, you'll just walk around the corner and die. So there's no terror there. It is the knowing that creates the terror. If you are unaware of the consequences of a monster's being, then seeing it won't carry any weight. It is the knowing that creates the horror. Similarly, in stories, the creation of suspense is not in the obfuscation of information, but in its release and relevance, such that the audience is postulating what might happen next, worries that the characters might make the wrong decisions. The key here being that the character doesn't necessarily need to know all the same information that you, the audience, have already realized. I've messed up my tenses so many times, and I've recorded this bit so many times, we're just gonna move on. A Little Night Music is the last of Sondheim's shows that I'll talk about in detail today, and it is one where the plot is immediately betrayed within the first real song, Now, Soon, Later. We learn that Frederick wants gratification right now and has made the mistake of marrying this ditzy girl, Anne, who isn't actually what he needs in the search for the comfort of love, and that he's still in love with Desiree Armfeldt. We learn that Desiree is a great actress who has recently come to town, and Frederick and his wife, Anne, will go to see one of her shows. We learn that Anne is cautious and knows she isn't right for Frederick and really wants the same intimacy he does, but probably not with him. We learn that Frederick's son, Henrik, is depressed and suicidal, planning on going into the clergy, envious of the intimacy others seem to enjoy, especially of Anne, who is his age. There we have all of the information we need to know, essentially, the entirety of their journeys throughout the musical. That Frederick will end up with Desiree after rekindling their romance after her show, that Anne will be jealous of Frederick's attentions to Desiree and seek to find a solution which will lead to her ending up in Henrik's arms after he tries to kill himself but fails miserably as he shares those feelings with her. We get the very obvious connection of Frederick to Frederica, Desiree's daughter. It's not hard to guess their relationship. This is solidified in some of the very first words in the show by Madame Armfeldt, that the knight will smile 3 times, the first on the young, Henrik and Anne, the second on the fools, Frederick and Desiree, and lastly on herself, foreshadowing her own death. Literally all but the characters of Carl Magnus, Charlotte, and Petra have their stories laid out plain as day from this very first scene. 5 minutes in, barely, and you already know how it ends. And that is exactly why you keep watching, because it's fascinating to watch it unfold. My story will begin with the narrator saying, "This is a ghost story," We will know from the start that it's a tragedy. I won't obfuscate a thing. I am adamant that the audience be kept in the loop, as otherwise I'll have two simultaneous conflicting narratives running, and it'll be incredibly easy for the audience to get real confused real fast. Now, these rules of writing are obviously not law. There are times when they can and should be broken. I already explained how I'm going to be breaking them in the writing of my own show. West Side Story, though, is the best example of Sondheims, as it defies pretty much every single one of these rules. I could elaborate, but if you know the show, you'll know what I mean. Yet, it's a highly awarded and universally beloved show, which just goes to demonstrate that everything, including these rules, is subjective. Take these rules, think about whether you want to apply them or whether you want to defy them. Justify your choice either way. That's the key. Everything you do should be intentional and necessary. I hope these rules and examples give you something to think about, whether you're merely a fan of musical theater, actually writing your own show, or just here to watch me write mine. If you're here for the last, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss my next video in 2 weeks, where I'll talk about reprises and my favorite use for them in theater. And I'll be writing the lyrics for the opening number and the finale to boot. See you guys then. Bye, y'all.